I've played Through Poppy Playtime Chapter 3 twice now, and honestly, there is so much to theorize over. But as is tradition on this channel, I spent my second playthrough hunting for secrets, Easter eggs, and other interesting details. Just like the previous two chapters, there's quite a lot hidden below the surface in this game, but don't worry, I've done all of that digging for you. I've looked in every nook and cranny, behind every closed cupboard door, and even inside the experiments. Don't ask. I did all of this to bring you some of that hidden lore, with my own theories and speculations of course. So here are 10 things you might have missed in Poppy Playtime Chapter 3. Number 1. Catnap's cutout is creepier than you think. Chapter 3 continues the tradition of character cutouts with voice lines that has been a staple of the series since the very beginning. These cutouts offer a little insight into each character, often with a creepy or dark twist added to build up the horror atmosphere in the game. In Chapter 3, we get one for each of the smiling critters, each one offering a little insight into their personalities and perhaps a little insight into how they meet their ends. I am sure we're going to have a lot to theorize over with these in the next few months. The main antagonist in Chapter 3, Catnap, gets his own as well. His one is a little different though. It doesn't appear to have any dialogue like all of the other smiling critters. Instead, it sounds like a low growl, or maybe breathing. But after playing around with the audio a little bit, it sounds just like a child struggling to breathe. This could make total sense. We know Catnap, or Experiment 1188, used to be Theodore Granville before he underwent the scientific process. But we know from the ARG that Theodore was in a nearly fatal accident. He was secretly trying to help 1006, the prototype, escape the factory, something that required 2 green grabback hands and therefore 2 people. But as we know, the green grabback hands are the ones that utilize electricity. During the escape attempt, something went wrong and Theodore was mortally wounded. At this point, 1006 was at the door and could have escaped, but he took Theo back to Thomas Clark, a pediatrician, to get him medical help, leading to his own capture. And yes, that is Thomas Clark that ends up being Bron. Just as an aside here, that makes it incredibly poignant that we end up beating Catnap with a green grab pack and electricity, something that 1006 took with him when he lifted Catnap. That potentially makes a red and a green grab pack hand that we've given him now. So listening to the cutout again, I think this breathing is Theodore on life support. He was almost killed by the accident with the electrical current stopping his heart. I'm willing to bet that this also left him with serious burns too, which is probably why this breathing kind of sounds like Darth Vader. This may have also been a reason why Theo was chosen to become Catnap in the first place, as a way to save his life, something I will be coming onto later in the video. But if Theo struggling to breathe and being recorded wasn't creepy enough, changing the pitch reveals that this distorted part of the audio is likely distorted speech too. It's far too warped to know what it really says, but to me it sounds either like help me or kill me. Either one would be pretty messed up. Number 2. Dr. White. Chapter 3 gave us a bunch more VHS recordings to slowly unravel the lore of the factory. Most contain characters we've already been introduced to, such as Stella, Rich, Harley Sawyer, and this mysterious unnamed scientist, but one of the VHS tapes reveals a character that, as far as I know, is completely new to the series, Dr. White. This tape tells us that children would be picked for something, and that this member of staff was encouraging the others to clap and cheer them goodbye.
Ah, and here they all are.
Well, of course. They'd never miss this.
Look at Mrs. Brooks. We're going away.
Oh, Stella. This week, Dr. White here has selected our very own Samuel Lee. Now, before he goes, let's all give Sam one last goodbye, shall we? With me. 1, 2, 3. Goodbye, Sam!
It's set up to sound like some sort of lottery system, but we know that really it's the staff choosing the next best candidate to be transferred into a doll. This is just one more example of Playtime Co's manipulation teaching the children to be excited about being chosen to undergo horrific and experimental surgery. Surgery that may have had a chance of failure, and one that even if successful, left your consciousness trapped inside a doll body forever. Pretty nightmarish stuff. So the fact that they make these children clap it is just kind of creepy. But very briefly in this VHS, we can hear a man called Dr. White who selected Samuel Lee to be the next candidate for the procedure. We don't get any of our references to this man in the chapter, but considering he is named in the VHS and in the credits, whereas many others are just named scientist, I think his name might be important. The really interesting thing about this name is that it could be yet another reference to something in our own world. Dr. White is a children's story by author Jane Goodall. It tells the tale of a small white dog who would visit terminally ill children in a pediatric hospital in London and help cure them. This is from the official description. Everyone loves Dr. White, a furry practitioner with 4 paws, a wagging tail, and an unorthodox bedside manner who works his magic on very ill children at a hospital. Although his treatment is unconventional, it has a great success rate. The theme of unconventional treatment definitely has links to Poppy Playtime. As I said earlier, it's possible that Theo's accident was one of the reasons why he was chosen to become a bigger body in the first place. His own body being severely damaged, he skipped the queue and was chosen as a sort of mercy. We even get more clues to this throughout Chapter 3, with Home Sweet Home containing what look suspiciously like hospital beds. In fact, I have a whole theory that bridges the gap between Elliot's supposed good intentions and the evil company we see today. The process of transferring children into dolls might have begun as a way to save the sick children, the orphans with terminal illnesses. This could link to the radio we hear in the nightmare too, with Elliot having a child's body in his home missing organs. This could have been an attempt to save the child, which is why the company fought so hard to clear his name. It was a terrible act, but it had good intentions. But you know what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Perhaps that road is a golden path. But if you want a really crazy theory, this could even have been a hint to who Dr. White would become. Dr. White in the story was a dog who cured people, and as of yet, we don't have a good answer of who the bigger body Dog Day was. All we know is that he stood against Catnap and was punished for it. So it's possible that this is a cryptic clue that Dog Day was ex-staff too. Dog Day is Dr. White in doll form. After all, we know for a fact that now at least some employees underwent the scientific process. We know that Thomas Clark became a Bron, so it's possible Dr. White continued his work in doll form. Hence why Dog Day seems to be more coherent and can have a real conversation with us, just like Poppy. Now before you start yelling at the screen, but Tericho, Dog Day and Dr. White have different voice actors. Yes, I know, but I've said for a long time now that the dolls probably used voice boxes to be able to talk. Something we saw in the earliest trailers, and you can even hear Dog Day's voice box when he talks.
I am the last of the smiling critters.
So we really can't use that as evidence anymore. Besides, so many voice actors have had multiple roles in Chapter 3, I think that theory has been put to rest now. But even if Dog Day is someone else, I do like the symbolism between the two stories of unconventional treatment, and I think it gives us a great insight into how these horrific experiments started in the first place. Number 3. Catnap stalks you. Throughout the game, there are a bunch of times when you can see Catnap skulking around in the background. Some of them are easy to miss. I missed this one right at the start of the game, and yes, on my first playthrough, I missed this whole scene. You can stop yelling at me now. Some of them are more obvious, but what you might not have considered is that this mirrors Huggy Wuggy from Chapter 1. He also stalked the player and had a couple of moments that were easy to miss if you didn't look carefully. Chapter 3 has now confirmed that Huggy, Mommy, and Catnap were all working with 1006 in some way or another. All 3 antagonists have spent some time being more friendly towards the player, or at least less lethal. It was only at specific parts where they turned aggressive, and once that happens, there is no turning back. But throughout the entirety of Chapter 3, we see these scratched messages on the walls warning us to leave. We were given every opportunity to turn back, but we chose to keep going. I'm probably going to delve more deeply into this in a future theory, but it's a cool detail that Catnap was watching us through the entire chapter, had plenty of opportunity to kill us, but didn't until the very end. Just like Huggy left us alone until we got close to Poppy, Catnap left us alone until we got close to opening this giant sealed door. The bigger bodies under 1006's influence had every opportunity to kill us earlier, but didn't. They are absolutely trying to stop us from reaching something, but I wouldn't be trusting Poppy's words just yet. Number 4. The hallucinations or nightmares are memories. Chapter 3 was always telling us that the gas was going to be important, all the way back to the first teaser trailer. And many theories later, we now know that it's called the red smoke, and it was used to keep the children in the playcare asleep. But now we also know that the red gas did indeed cause nightmares. In Chapter 3, we get a whole sequence that was entirely nightmare. As soon as we enter Home Sweet Home, we are hit with a wave of the red smoke. This turns the area into a more nightmarish version, with creepy radios giving us chilling backstory, hallways that don't physically make sense, and of course, the giant cursed Huggy. But if you were paying attention, this entire sequence was all in our head. First of all, we have no grab backhand in this area, and once the nightmare ends with Huggy grabbing us, we end up exactly where we passed out. Fun fact, in this segment, you can't run, which is a very common nightmare, one that I actually have myself, so I like that little detail. The tape we listen to in this area is even called a nightmare tape in the credits. That makes total sense. The gas was used to put people to sleep, and it worked on us. But if we were asleep, that also means that everything that happened during that sequence came from our mind, came from our memories. That means the player character already knew all of this exposition about Elliot. It also means that these areas were pulled from our memories too. I even theorize that this could have been our office. We know that the player is ex-staff, we just don't know how much knowledge we actually have. Many staff in the factory had no idea what was really going on. Only staff with higher clearance really did. In fact, even Stella Graber at one point was kept in the dark, and she was head of playcare. But this memory sequence really does suggest that the player knows a lot more than we first thought. This really makes the nightmare sequence towards the end of the game more significant. We see a number of scenes showing shadow children running around the playcare, meaning the protagonist has memories of playcare before the Hour of Joy. We've been here before. Either the protagonist has worked there, or more likely, originally began as an orphan in playcare and was recruited to work in the factory from the orphanage program. After all, we see that Playtime Co. has a very keen interest in teaching science to the orphans under their care. What better way to recruit scientists that won't go talking about the research to outsiders? This theme is reinforced with all the references to our guilt. The backwards audio in the first nightmare sequence reveals that we missed the event, missed the meeting, missed the party.
I find your presence intrusive. After all this time you return. You come in here and you kill and murder. You pillage and destroy. Your presence was demanded 10 years ago and you didn't show up. 8/8/1995. You were supposed to be here. Why weren't you here? You missed the event. You missed the meeting. You missed the party. You have no right to be here. 8/8/1995.
For some reason, we were told to be here for the Hour of Joy, but we didn't show up. Maybe to save our own life, or maybe for another reason. Either way, this perfectly explains why the protagonist returns to the factory and didn't attempt to leave as soon as we saw the living Huggy. The protagonist feels guilt for something, so much so, it gives them nightmares, and they're here to put an end to it. Number 5. Kissy Has Teeth. Kissy Missy has been a mystery ever since her introduction in Chapter 2. There, she seemed to glance at us before seemingly helping us and then leaving. Very different to how Huggy reacted to us. But in Chapter 3, she seems much more angry with us. She attacks us when leaving Home Sweet Home, and it's only when Poppy stops her that she calms down. Notice how she seems very obedient to Poppy though, just as Huggy was described as having maximum obedience, but he's obedient to 1006. But if you take a closer look at Kissy, I mean a really close look at her, you can see that she has those deadly teeth that Huggy had as well, and what looks like that smaller second mouth too. Now perhaps these were just left over and the devs used the model of Huggy to create Kissy, but with how much work went into Kissy's animation, I don't think so. But what makes this whole point so interesting is that we can hear how heavy Kissy is, and knowing that she has these teeth too, I bet Kissy is actually pretty deadly, just like Huggy has been shown to be as well. They really are a pair. That means that if something attacked her at the end, they must have been something equally as dangerous. In fact, this point made me go back and investigate, and it really sounds like Huggy was the one attacking Kissy at the end of Chapter 3. Now I want to add this part in after the reception of my last video, but a lot of people have been saying it was potentially 1006 that attacked Kissy, but I don't think so. I actually think this doesn't fit his MO. We only see 1006 take toys that are already pretty much dead, so I don't think it was 1006 that attacked Kissy. I also don't think it was Boxy Boo, they sound very different. I think the number of candidates are much smaller than that. Whatever happened up there, if something did attack Kissy, it must have been something pretty big, and I can't wait to find out in Chapter 4. Number 6. Bugs Bunzo. Bunzo Bunny at this point has to be Poppy Playtime's twisted version of Bugs Bunny. while Bugs always manages to get away, but Bunzo seems to meet his end every time. In Chapter 2, the Bunzo in musical memory is taken by Mommy and webbed to the ceiling in anger for failing her. Now in Chapter 3, we see a Bunzo running away from Catnap before coughing, stumbling, and being pounced on by the big purple kitty. I guess it's wabbit hunting season after all. But this Bunzo poster we can see in Chapter 3 is actually a cheeky reference to the Bunzo comics that released before the chapter. In that comic series drawn by Apostle, we got to see the unfortunate fate of one Bunzo bunny doll. This one was going on an egg hunt, kind of like we all do looking for Easter eggs in this game. But just like me, he ended up going down the rabbit hole. Literally. This one ended up falling down this incredibly dangerous chute and ended up presumably starving to death in this room. This poster suddenly becomes much more ironic. But this isn't the first time Playtime Co., or Mob I guess, have been very cheeky with their posters like this. The safety poster of Bron with the information that Playtime Co. are not liable for any injuries sustained in the factory was also very cheeky reference to the fact that the living Bron we see in the VHS was Thomas Clark. He ended up with lung cancer, most likely due to working around the red smoke we see in Chapter 3. In fact, almost every poster in the game has some sort of cheeky reference to something horrible that happened in the factory. My favourite being Poppy, as I still think she's playing with us with her lies and manipulation. Either way, it's very sad that Bunzo seems to be a recurring theme alongside Cursed Huggy now. We get a Bunzo death in every chapter, just like we get a Cursed Huggy in every one as well. I'm sure we will all go hunting for it in Chapter 4. Number 7. Missing People. Now this one is a cool little detail that is pretty hard to find, mostly due to the fact that it shows up in areas where you're being chased by Miss Delight. I still can't quite work out if that's a play on words though. Miss Delight? Miss the Light? Maybe. Fun fact about her, by the way, if you take a close look at the yardstick she used as a handle for the weapon she talks to, called Bob, you can see the name tag that says, "Hello, my name is Carmen," implying that this version of Miss Delight was originally called Carmen. Now, there is a cake called Carmen Delight, so either a developer really likes that cake or this is just a huge coincidence. But back to the point, in a few of the rooms where this chase sequence is happening, you can find this notice board that contains a fair few interesting references. First of all, we can see this one that tells us students and staff had started going missing far before the Hour of Joy. This backs up the file in the ARG that tells us a staff member was found dead with abdominal punctures and had likely been there for weeks before anyone found him. Now that we know just how large this facility actually is, this makes total sense. The underground section of the factory is far larger than I ever thought it would be, and this makes the train make way more sense. But as the company profits began to dwindle, many areas of the factory likely became abandoned, something we see in another poster on this board. I love the imagery the devs are painting here. Those abandoned areas of the factory were likely where escaped toys lurked, especially since it seems like Harley Sawyer had gone rogue, programming the toys to eat human flesh. There could have been many dark corridors of the factory that no one ever went to anymore. One wrong turn or one malfunctioning door too many, and you could find yourself isolated with no idea that there were rogue living toys ready to eat you. This probably got worse over time since the factory was slowly falling apart too, and there are heavy hints that the children like to go wandering into areas they shouldn't, possibly one of the reasons why the company started using the red gas in the first place. We can see the school had a club they called the Drama Club of Shadows, teaching the children how to scare each other. This is likely a hint to why some of the bigger bodies like to try and scare us. We see both Huggy and Catnap seem to like to stalk the player and toy with us before they attacked. Something they probably learned here, and very childlike, let's be honest. Some of the posters tell us that the school was closed at some point too, likely due to a lack of staff, which is why we see most of the teachers were replaced with Miss Delight. The posters that were made after the school reopened felt much more robotic, and you can see that many of the posters have been left here since the 80s, showing how the Miss Delight teachers didn't have the same human touch as they did before they went through the transfer process. Finally, we can see the school schedule with 11 o'clock being labelled as snack time. This is ironic since the Hour of Joy began at 11 as well, and that was arguably snack time for the living toys. Speaking of snack time brings me straight on to my next point. Number 8. Food Glorious Food. Chapter 3 answered one of our longest standing questions. What exactly did the toys eat all of these years? Poppy tells us that the toys dragged the dead staff down below and ate them, presumably where we were going at the end of the chapter. This also gives us a great explanation of how 1006 gained and maintained control over many of the toys. He promised them food, something he now does with the smiling critters. They do what he says, and he feeds them. Literally, the hand that feeds. Ironically, this all came from Harley Sawyer training them to eat human flesh, something I strongly believe he began to psychologically condition the orphans to do in areas such as the musical memory game. But this raises just even more questions. If all the toys aside from 1006 need to feed, well then what have Poppy and Kissy been eating all of this time? Again, I'm not entirely convinced Poppy is innocent despite what she claims. But what makes this even more creepy, if you collect all the notes in the school, you get a really disturbing backstory for the final remaining Miss Delight. She tells us that someone locked all the teachers inside the school. Over time, as the hunger began to set in, the teachers started turning on one another, with Miss Delight, again I'm going to call her Carmen, being singled out as the first to die. In pure desperation, Carmen took her makeshift weapon, originally meant to protect her from the toys outside, and she killed the other teachers. The implication here is that she ate the others, which is why we can't see any more of them around. But the weirdest part about this entire story is that while Carmen was talking about being so desperately hungry that she had to resort to eating her co-workers, the vending machines full of food around the school remain untouched. It wasn't that she was desperately hungry for food, she was desperately hungry for flesh. Yes, I know leaf-flavored candy doesn't seem great, but it would be better than nothing, right? Again, it seems like Harley Sawyer's experiments have really done a number on these toys, but that just makes me wonder, what were they being fed before the Hour of Joy? Perhaps this possibly explains all those missing staff and students. Number 9. The Hour of Joy was a lie. In Chapter 3, we finally get to see the Hour of Joy. The moment the toys rebelled was caught on CCTV, and honestly, I absolutely adored this VHS segment. The animation reminded me of the Backrooms in the best way. The music was haunting, the imagery, it was just pure perfection. We finally got to see how terrifying this event must have been. The toys simultaneously began to attack. Not just the bigger bodies either, even the smaller ones joined in. But the violence was so sudden, so widespread, that there was absolutely nothing anyone could do. Many of these staff had no idea that the toys were capable of coming to life, and those that did were too deep inside the factory to get out. It really was a recipe for disaster. In fact, taking a closer look at Huggy's room, you can see that most of the people here fled through this door, which we know goes deeper into the factory. In their panic, they ran right into the nest. But as awesome as this VHS was, it also tells us that we have been fed lies up until this point. In Kissy Missy's VHS, we saw her at the end lying motionless on the train, while several staff members lay dead around her. We all theorized that this was either 1006 or Catnap, due to the scratch marks left behind her, and the fact that Kissy has always been seen as this friendly character. But if you watch the Hour of Joy VHS, you can see that this was totally fabricated. This scene shows that it was Kissy who killed these staff, and she even chased this one down who was trying to flee. If you line it up, you can see that this pose is exactly the same, meaning that the original VHS we saw had actually been tampered with just like it stated. The implications of this are huge. Not only does it imply that some remnant of the company remained after the Hour of Joy, possibly another facility or a segment of the factory that managed to survive for longer, maybe a more secure area, but it also implies something far more sinister. In the VHS, we see text that we assume is 1006 instructing someone to loosen the straps. Most of us thought this was an instruction for Catnap or another toy, but now I'm not so sure. In the reversed audio in the player's nightmare sequence, we hear someone telling us that we have no right to be here since our presence was demanded on the same day of the Hour of Joy, but we missed the event. I actually think that some humans were involved in the Hour of Joy too. We know that 1006 is a master manipulator, and now we even know he had the ability to mimic the voices of others. We can hear him mimic other toys, but even Harley Sawyer. I think 1006 got people sympathetic to the toys to help him, and for the ones that weren't, he could have easily used the phones to impersonate higher up staff like Stella or Laith Pierre to order the staff to do his bidding. Remember, Playtime Co. was such a strict company that any disobedience was harshly punished. Not only could you lose your job, but you could also be transferred into a doll or even be fed to Boxy Boo. I doubt many staff would have disobeyed a direct order from a superior. In fact, looking closely at Kissy Missy's escape, I think it's possible that this member of staff was the one who loosened her straps. You can see he stood back, cautiously watching. He seems incredibly surprised when Kissy attacks though. Maybe he thought that by working with 1006, he would be spared. Or perhaps he thought that Kissy would be friendly to him since he freed her. What a mistake he made. But this isn't the only interesting detail in this VHS. At the end we see the Poppy door surrounded by dead staff, and we can see that the warnings aren't here yet, meaning that it likely wasn't a human staff member that wrote these warnings. If you missed my theory on it, I believe that 1006 had this warning put here. possibly Craftycorn doing the writing, but most likely Catnap being the one that filled Poppy's case with gas to keep her asleep here. I might make a whole theory on this, but it really does seem like 1006 is trying to stop us from delving into the factory. It seems like we've been given every warning possible, every possible chance to turn back. Huggy didn't kill us until we got close to Poppy because 1006 knows she's dangerous. Mommy wanted to kill us too, but 1006 instructed her to give us the train code so we could leave. She too only got aggressive once we started to go off track and delve into the secret areas of the factory. Now finally in chapter 3, Catnap warned us several times to leave. It was only once we got close to opening this locked door that he also attacked us. Like I say, I have a whole theory on this that I will make later, but it doesn't seem like 1006 is really the one we should be worrying about. In fact, I'm not so sure I trust what Poppy tells us about the Hour of Joy at all. She definitely has kept a lot from us up until this point, only telling us parts of the story and always seeming to uncover details conveniently after we've agreed to help her or been forced to. So while yes, the Hour of Joy was absolutely a massacre, I wouldn't take Poppy's explanation for it as gospel. Number 10. Don't trust Olly. Now this detail makes theory crafting for Poppy Playtime much more difficult. In fact, the whole of chapter 3 has made the events of Poppy Playtime more tricky to untangle. Not only do we now know that the red gas causes hallucinations, meaning we might not be able to trust what we see, we also know that at least one VHS has been tampered with, meaning many of the ARG elements and VHS tapes we watch might not be reliable either. But to make things even worse, we can't even trust what we hear anymore. We learned at the end of the chapter that 1006 has the ability to mimic many different voices, not only toy voices, but human voices as well. This means that VHS tapes, these cardboard cutouts, even these phone calls could all be fabricated. In fact, this could explain why these VHS tapes are just lying around suspiciously like this. Many of them seem like they are just waiting for us to watch them, almost like someone left them here for us to watch. Now on top of this, we got introduced to a new character, or more accurately the voice of one, Olly. Fans have already begun wildly speculating on who Olly could be, with many people suggesting that 1006 is mimicking this voice to us. However, I don't think that this is the case. My main reason for this is that 1006 up until this point has seemingly been trying everything he can to keep us away. Again, we've had multiple warnings, multiple opportunities to turn back. We've even had 2 times now that 1006 had a perfect opportunity to attack us but didn't. We saw what he did to Catnap and well, we were right there. He could have tried the same thing to us, but he didn't. Catnap himself, who we now know was following 1006 like a god, tried everything to stop us turning on this machine and opening up this door. Again, Catnap had plenty of opportunity to attack us. It was only after we turned on this machine that he actually did. So if 1006 doesn't want us to progress through the factory, it makes no sense for him to use Olly's voice to guide us to do that very objective. In fact, Olly seems aligned perfectly with Poppy, who herself says she's against 1006. Now again, I don't trust her at all, but someone in the factory warned us about her, so I think her and 1006 being opposed is true. Unless this is them working together in the biggest manipulation ever, but it seems counterproductive to me. So Olly is definitely someone on Poppy's side and not 1006's. But to make this even more confusing, Olly has the voice of a child. Something incredibly unlikely to be true since we know the factory has been abandoned for 10 years. So unless Olly was a baby when the factory was abandoned and somehow survived all this time, well, there's something fishy going on. To make this even more complicated, the name Olly is only 1 letter away from the name Elliot. If that isn't a red flag of the century, I don't know what is. Now we don't really know much about Olly at all, but the hints suggest that Project Playtime may contain some clues. The game had 2 VHS tapes that contained some secret messages from a supposed friend. They told us that the phone was our gift and we would know when the time is right. Now in chapter 3, Olly calls us on this very same phone. I think Olly is potentially the same person that's in this VHS talking to us. Olly also seems to have knowledge of everything we see, something people have mentioned in the comments. I think they are either using the CCTV cameras to watch us, something we know are absolutely everywhere, or they are using the phone. After all, the phone has eyes, so it's possible. Now I say they because Olly is likely a boy's name, possibly being short for Oliver, but it could also be a girl's name, short for Olive or Olivia. Now that I type this out though, Olly literally contains the word lie. It's just too perfect. Fun little detail about Olly as well is that you can see that they get very angry with you if you don't do as they say. At one point, if you go idle for too long or spend too long exploring like I did, Olly seems to get very impatient.
Under the statue!
Something that Poppy did in chapter 2 as well.
While I'm still a doll.
Right now we really don't have much to go on, but my gut is telling me that Olly is an experiment just like all the other characters we've met. It's possible that their consciousness was put into a machine like a make-a-friend machine, which is why they have so much control around the factory. Think of them as a crude form of AI, like the Red Queen in Resident Evil. If you want to go really crazy with theories though, remember our character has a lot of knowledge of this factory and is also heavily implied to have grown up here. So perhaps Olly is just a figment of our imagination, kind of like Rick in The Walking Dead. Olly is our inner voice manifesting as a child to guide us through the factory and to give us a reason to keep going. Or possibly a friend that we grew up with here. Just a thought. Either way, right now, Olly is going on the list of people I do not trust, and I think they're going to be a key player in the lore going forward. Oh man, so many details in Chapter 3, I'm sure I'm going to be theorizing over it in the next coming months, probably all the way up to Little Nightmares 3. If you did enjoy the vid, leave it a like and consider subscribing. I deep dive into plenty of horror games like this, I make theories, I bring you things you never thought of, and I even do occasional gameplay as well. So if that sounds good to you, maybe hit that sub button. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.